Hi, I'm Barbara Balin, and I wanted to stress that the track group is a nonpartisan group with a mission to bring public education to the community and try to bridge the aisle, so to speak, as much as possible, and put a face to the issues. And so in looking at where some of the gaps were in the community, we found that one of them was the general plan. A lot of folks refer to the general plan as our blueprint, our guiding document, and when we look at the 1996 general plan and its various incarnations and revisions, some of us have felt, well, when did some of this happen? When did some of these groups take place? And when did this happen? Because there's a sense of not being as included in the process as we would like to be, and also make it hopefully as community oriented. Everything has politics in this county, but public involvement is a really good thing. And so we thought, the track folks, that it would be a good idea to, now that we're in the revision stages of our county's general plan, to have hopefully this will be the first of several meetings or panels to help us educate ourselves so how we can be effectively involved in the planning process in Tuolumne County. So with that, I wanted to introduce our planner, Quincy here, and here's the bio. Ms. Gailey is a professional planner with over 16 years of experience managing projects, preparing environmental documents, and processing entitlements throughout California and Nevada. Ms. Gailey has served as a project manager for a variety of projects involving natural resources, state, federal, and local regulations, as well as current planning projects for local jurisdictions. At Tuolumne County, she is the assistant planner of development, and that is to David Gonzalez, who replaced Bev Shane, at the Community Resources Agency, and is responsible for managing the planning division. So I want to welcome Quincy. I know you many years of experience. You're coming back to Tuolumne County, and she's going to talk to us about the general plan and what it is and effective involvement. And we'll have time for questions, so have your questions ready, and also please write them down on that little piece of paper. So welcome, Quincy. Okay.
I brought some handouts, so if anyone didn't grab one or would like to take an extra, please do so. I will also email it to Mercedes, so anyone who would like a digital copy or would like to forward it on to someone who didn't attend tonight, that's available as well. My name is Quincy Yaley. I'm the Assistant Director of the Community Resources Agency here at Tuolumne County. Tonight the topic is key concepts of the general plan, but I'll tell you that there's no limit to your question. Feel free to ask anything you would like to know the answer to. I will do my best to provide you information, and if I don't know the answer, we can exchange information. I can get that to you at a future date. I don't have any notes. I speak from the heart. This planning is my passion, it's my profession. The line between home and work is blurred in my life. So you're going to get the real authentic me and the real experience. So I like to use a lot of humor in my talks, and I encourage you to laugh at me because that will make me feel good.
Got it.
I also just wanted to thank Mercedes and Barbara for inviting me tonight. I'm happy to come back at any point in the future to address any topics that your group or the public is interested in. So with that, we will get started. This is sort of what I'm planning on talking about tonight. I wanted to let you know a little bit about myself, answer the question of why do we plan? Why do we even care? What is a general plan, and how is a general plan used in today's world? We can go over the contents of a general plan, what is in it, what isn't in a general plan. I'll touch on its relationship to other documents and tools that local government uses, and at the end we'll hopefully tie a big bow on it and give it some meaning for you all. So again, No need to wait to the end. If you have questions, feel free to ask. I also want to state that, that I'm a professional planner, but you are all community members, and many of you community activists. We share a collective body of knowledge. I don't claim to know all of the answers or know what is best for you. You may all have information and ideas to share with me as well. And so this is a two-way street. We, much like we'll get into the general plan, where all of our elements are linked together. And so I just want to make sure that you have an understanding that we're all equals when we're coming at this task. So a little bit about me. I have an undergraduate degree from UC Berkeley. I wanted to be a biologist. While I was at Cal and working in a lot of professors' labs, I found there to be a disconnect between a lot of the research that was going on in the biological field and its ability to communicate that information to the public. I felt there was a lot of meaningful answers, but that no one could hear it, and that biologists weren't very good at always telling that story. And so I sort of wanted to become this translator between something I cared a lot about, which is biological resources, and where I lived, which was my community. After UC Berkeley, I went down to Cal Poly San Luis Obispo and spent several years there obtaining my master's degree in city and regional planning. A friend of mine left that program and graduated and came to Tuolumne County and got a job. And it just so happened I was engaged to a gentleman who lived here in Tuolumne County, and during that time a job opened as a Planner 1 at Tuolumne County, and we decided I'd be an idiot to stay in school. How often does a job open up in Tuolumne County as a Planner 1 where your future husband lives? So I left my planning program. Eventually I did go back and finish it, but we think maybe 2003-ish, just a little foggy, came to Tuolumne County as a Planner 1. Started doing design review permits, simple use permits, working at the counter, giving information and things like that. So my roots are truly here in this county, and I'm grateful to Mike Laird and Bev Shane for providing that opportunity to me. I learned a lot in the 2 years I worked as a Planner 1 and Planner 2 here, and have sung those praises my whole professional life. I am truly grateful for that experience. After working at Tuolumne County for a few years, I went to work in private consulting and truly have worked up and down the state as well as in Nevada. In Nevada, it's really interesting. If you want to build a 300-home subdivision, all you have to do is show up at the planning department with your plans for 300 homes, and then they assign you a hearing date. And in 6 weeks, you're expected to show up at the city council meeting, and the burden is on the local government, the burden is on the planner to obtain everything that they could possibly need within the short time frame so that, God forbid, the developer misses their planning date. So when I worked in Reno, we were adopting multi-hundred family single home subdivisions by the week. And it was a very different experience than I had been trained in. So I'm grateful for that exposure. Provides a different perspective to the process, for better or for worse. So I've been in consulting, like I said, for a number of years, working with public and private agencies, local, state, federal, developers, public agencies. Some of the things that I've done a lot of wetlands work, air pollution modeling, greenhouse gas work, CEQA, NEPA, CEQA, which is the California Environmental Quality Act, NEPA, which is the national federal version of that, a little bit different. One of the things that you'll see after my name is I have an AICP. I hesitate to tell you that the going joke means that means any idiot can plan. But truth be told, it's a professional exam that after a certain number of years in the field can be obtained. So I bring it to your attention so that if you see it after other folks' names, you know that they paid some money, they studied really hard, and they had a test. But I also tell you that so you don't lend any additional credence to those initials. Take the person for who they are, not for the initials. So I always find that funny. So we kind of arrive at the question before we even get to the general plan is why are we doing this? Why are we even planning? And it really goes back to sort of long history. I'm sure it involves some European governments and European town planning that arrived in the United States. But basically, it gets down to this government concept of government is here to provide some type of police powers. And it's basically the government's really here to serve the interests of the general security, health, safety, morals, and welfare of the public. And that can be lost at times, but it's the basic concept of why I go to work every day, is this is what I'm trying to do, is the security, the health, safety, morals, and welfare of the public. The history of planning really started looking back at public health and zoning, thinking of urban areas in the industrialized age where you were having large apartment buildings being constructed that were overrun with public health issues, that were too close to sewer outfalls or were too close to an industrial land use, and that truly was the start of zoning, which jumps ahead from the general plan, so we'll get back to that. But noxious uses, sanitary issues, looking at transportation, air quality, roads, through high-rise apartment building subdivision areas, and so the heart of planning really does start with public health, and that's truly where it started. The last two bullets are mine. Orderly and safe communities, and making communities fair and accessible to all. Not just in the private property right, but in the ability for the public to access certain needs and services. Safe communities, and developing them in an orderly fashion. What comes next? And are we leapfrogging, or are we doing it in a manner that makes sense and has some sort of plan to it? I like graphics. So this is just an old zoning map from Philadelphia. Philadelphia is one of a cornerstone in the history of planning in terms of zoning. And I put this up here only to compare it to something that's happening more currently, which looks more like this. This is in Madison, North Carolina, actually. And you can see how far we've come in 200 years or so in terms of zoning. So we use fancy maps. We use geographic information systems, which is a mapping program to delineate land uses and other types of information. And our county has something like this as well, and I will get into that a little bit. So, why plan? For safety, for the public good, for the welfare of our community. It's given to me under the police powers of a government, and it's not something that I take lightly. And so, thank you. This is sort of an example of starting kind of back at the beginning of police power and how that might translate into an action that your local government may take currently. So starting about, okay, we're charged, the government charged with protecting the health and welfare of citizens. Coming down a little bit, okay, we need to improve access to healthy food for a community. And so we're going to call upon our powers to look out for the health, safety, and welfare of populations and of our community to do that. Then we might say, okay, there's a link between access to nutritious food and health, and that there's studies that show that there's empirical evidence that shows that, and again, supporting government's role in intervening, we can say. And finally, where I step in here is at the bottom of this triangle, is that government utilizes land use regulations to promote and require improved access to healthy foods. And that comes in when we're talking about zoning codes. And it kind of all links back together. And so your local government may decide to create incentives for farmers markets in certain communities, or may provide streamlining for certain types of local fresh produce stands or stores or something like that. So it kind of goes from this very esoteric concept of police powers and promoting the health, safety, and welfare of the community into something that's very tangible, maybe something like the farmery, something like that. So it may seem big, but it's actually in front of our face every day. I like this picture because, again, it's a little bit on zoning, but this was actually a photo. It's a photo of a rendering from Denver, and it was in a sales brochure of, wouldn't this building, that's this large apartment building, be amazing? And I thought, yeah, that'd be amazing, but what about this guy?
Yeah.
Yeah, this new development, there was a sales brochure, a buyer, condo over here in Denver. But this is why we have zoning, okay, so that we try to avoid this type of thing happening, because there's probably a better way to do this. And certainly in our community, this is not something that we try to promote. And we do that through zoning. So I know I've talked a lot about zoning, but it truly did come first before the general plan, and really sets the basis for that discussion. So I thought that was humorous. Okay, so what is a general plan? Prior to 1971 in California, the general plan was an informal planning document. It wasn't until 1971 that the legislature codified that cities and counties were required to draft and adopt a general plan. It's oftentimes, as mentioned before, referred to a blueprint. It's referred to as a constitution. And it lays out the future of a community in somewhat vague terms. I described it to a group I talked about last week as if you're putting goals and policies. Let's say you have a family and you're just married, or maybe you're single, and you put goals and policies on your life, and then your family changes. You get married, or you have a couple more kids, but you're not allowed to change the goals and policies of your life. It's something you have to still live by. So the general plan, the framework of it doesn't change over whatever the planning horizon is for that document, but a lot of things change underneath it, and that's the challenge that's the professionals are tasked with, and that a community is tasked with, is how do we write a document that can't change when we know our community may fluctuate, and that is the true challenge. I've heard a couple things is that the general plan is for 10 years or 15 years or has to be for 20 years, and the legislature doesn't actually say how long your general plan what your planning horizon is. It leaves it up to the local government. It was mentioned the last time we adopted a general plan is in 1996. We're not that far off from kind of putting the tail on the donkey, so to speak, in terms of getting it done in the correct amount of time, and we can talk more about our local general plan. I'm sure you have questions. General plans typically consist of goals, policies, and implementation programs. And a lot of times it's hard to know what those mean. If I had I gave myself an exercise when I came to the county, was I took our general plan and I took a yellow highlighter and I highlighted every word that said should, promote, encourage, support. And that's a lot of yellow marks. I kind of wanted to see if it was true or if it was perception, because that's what I had heard, and it's true. There's a lot of yellow highlights in my general plan, but I've learned over the years that it's a balance to strike, that to fill it with should, mays, and shalls, or should and shalls, can be too tight of a box, and too many could, promote, and encourage is too loose of a box. And that's, like I said, our task is to strike that balance between providing a framework for our community that we can live with, knowing that things may fluctuate. The general plan is also full of a lot of diagrams, a lot of maps, and a lot of data. And that task is daunting, to make sure that all of your data is correct. The whole document is of primary concern, but also is a very challenging task. But the devil is in the data. If we say that we want to put X amount of housing units in a community, but the population growth doesn't support that, that's a question to ask. If we say we're not putting any new residential growth in a community or a certain area, but the data supports growth in a school district or growth from somewhere else, that's another question to ask. Not that any of those are wrong situations, but it's important to ask what those questions are. The general plan is made up of elements, is what they call them. And I will get to those in just a moment. But what it means is that there's elements or chapters that we have to put in our general plan in order to get it certified, approved, or otherwise basically blessed by the state of California. But the state of California allows us to be flexible in that approach, in that we have to hit the topic areas. We don't have to hit the chapter titles, okay? And I think that that's something that can be very confusing for the public, is that as you'll see, there's certain topics that have to be covered, but if you read a general plan and it doesn't have that chapter heading, you think we're hiding something. But really, we've just put it under a different name. And so that's our job as planners, is to provide you a glossary and a dictionary and an index of what page is your question on, and that's our goal. Another big issue is internal consistency, and I alluded to it a little bit, but again, the housing element, the land use element, the circulation element, your goals for open space protection, your goals for parkland, that all has to jive together. You can't say you're going to preserve 80% of your county in parkland, but yet you're proposing 80% new units. There's obviously a disconnect there, and I'm overstating the situation, but you can scale back from that to sort of to find the true ground. And as the public, when you're reading that, your gut will go off. Your red flag will go off and go, that doesn't seem right. That doesn't seem, wait, they just told me that community was, built out. But over here, they're telling me they're building a 4-lane freeway to that community. So that's just not something that's working for me. So internal consistency is a big one. And it's a big thing that we're looking at while we're sort of embarking on this next voyage of the Tuolumne County General Plan, is going back to make sure that when we said what we said, it made sense with what we said on the next page. So that's a big thing. So these are the contents of a typical general plan, and the first up to optional, those are topics that are required to be addressed by the state government. The state government, I should add, the agency that regulates the general plan is called the Office of Planning and Research. You will hear people refer to it as OPR, and they are the gurus in the sky that shine down and provide guidance for us as we're preparing our general plan. They recently released a new draft of guidelines, which in title sound like they're guidelines, but actually it's a wonderful resource of what's required in a general plan. It's probably 300 or 400 pages long. It's very technical, but there are some summaries available, and you can find it on OPR's website. The bullet points here I'm going to go over, and then I will go into detail because no one's asking questions yet. I'm a little disappointed. Hoping I'm going to get a question soon. We'll go into each of the elements. Circulation, land use, open space, noise and safety, housing and conservation are the required elements or topics. Remember I said the format can be flexible, so sometimes these things are buried in other chapters or are put under a different title, but addressed in concept. Optional elements, and this is by no means an exhaustive list: healthy communities, climate change, economics, cultural resources, community plans. It's sort of, the optional elements hit kind of whatever buzzing in your town at the time that you do a general plan. And, not just what's in your community, but kind of whatever the legislature's hot to trot on up in Sacramento. with respect to things that they want local governments to address in a more long-range fashion. So a lot of these topics there's state laws, like cultural resources, for example. There's recent legislation out about local governments working with local tribes. And while it's not a mandate in the general plan, it may behoove a local government to include language as to that topic in their general plan, and based on the context of their county, maybe it's so significant they would write an entire element of it. Otherwise, maybe they just might check on it. Yes. Go ahead.
Housing, I mean, I understand, do you project low-income housing needs in the general plan?
Yes, so I will touch on the housing element in a moment, but that's actually one of our more regulated elements of the general plan. The housing element is approved separately from your larger general plan, and it's approved every 5 years, and it has to be certified by another state agency, Housing and Community Development, or HCD, you'll hear it referred to. Talk about data, the housing element, there's more tables and data than there is language. And so the housing element has a lot of information, a lot of it's pulled from the census. And then there is language on housing types, housing affordability, things like that. And then the local government could choose to make goals, policies, and implementation programs off of what the data shows. Did you have a question about that?
Quincy, is it better to save a question about circulation till you
Hit it.
Okay, on circulation, and I remember Bev Shane talking about, and Mike Laird talking about the importance of safety. And, you know, we just saw with Santa Rosa and some of the big fires that go on, and being able to have appropriate circulation where we don't just have dead-end places and trying to make sure they're through. Does the circulation element also then apply to private roads? I walk every day on a private road where they intentionally dig it out and force people not to drive on it. And it's a safety issue for people that live on that mountain.
So let me give you an example and an answer to your question.
Okay.
So the general plan might say something like this, goal 12B, promote the construction, did you all catch it?
Yeah.
Promote the construction of pedestrian-friendly walkways or pedestrian-friendly shoulders along roads within our county. It might say also promote the connectivity of, promote through roads, through connecting existing subdivisions to proposed subdivision. It might say something like that. And then your actual construction standards are going to be in something we'll touch on later, which is your ordinance code for your county. So a general plan may not have the specifics of what that curb, gutter, sidewalk, or shoulder needs to be. It may have general themes of road design on a very broad basis. And so the answer could be, it could be in both, okay? There could be some policies in the general plan that would support such a thing as you're referring to. And there could also be language in an ordinance code that would be more construction specific. Yeah, John.
So this may be in safety rather than in circulation, but an example back to private roads is there is a requirement that a road that is being constructed or development that is taking place along a dead-end road can only have a certain distance for safety because of the need for fire engines to be able to get out, all these other things, other people to escape, the kinds of things you just talked about, Santa Rosa, where some of those situations didn't happen. The state actually, and I forget where it's created, has a certain standard for how long dead-end roads can be based on the amount of development along them. However, something that Quincy will talk about at length at some point, I'm sure, is that all of the general plan requirements or the language that is in the general plan is open to the interpretation of the Board of Supervisors, people like you, Roy, who were there at a certain time on a certain day. So they may decide that despite what the state has as their maximum length for a dead-end road, they can choose, despite what is in the general plan or an ordinance, they can choose to have something else approved. And that's hopefully something you can talk about, that flexibility, as you go through a lot of these.
Yeah, dead-end roads, I get a question every day about, and actually the form this is the form that the question comes in, is to say, I want to build a second unit on my property. Can I build a second unit? That's how I get the question, at least every day. And the answer is in multiple locations. It might be in the general plan in that we promote the construction of excess secondary dwelling units as a way to provide housing, affordable housing or rental housing. So you might have some information in the general plan about that. There might be information in our zoning code that that will say you can have a second residence if it's X amount of square feet, and if your zoning is XYZ, and if you're located ABC feet from the nearest intersection. And then it'll say, see this chapter. And then we go see that chapter. And then it references the 4290 fire code. And then all of it can break loose when you get to an actual project and someone wants to do something like a planned unit development or a development agreement or something like that. So this is an entire another presentation, but to give an answer in planning, and I'm training some new staff, and they're very frustrated because they go, there's no answer to this question, or the answer is endless. And I would go, that's right. That's right. Yes.
Quincy, I got a question. Isn't there some new state law that says you can have a second senior resident dwelling on a property now?
There's some new legislation that was passed, forgive me of the date, I want to say it was in 2016, that addressed, and I've briefly reviewed it, so I would say I'm not near an expert on it, but it basically said that city or county was required to address secondary accessory dwelling units in their ordinance code. My understanding is it didn't necessarily say exactly what that had to be, but it was a way of addressing senior housing, rental housing, and affordable housing, if we're talking about the same thing.
Yeah, that's what I'm...
And so my understanding, and it's on a to-do list, is a code analysis basically to ensure that our Title 17 complies with that. But my understanding is that you have to address it in your ordinance, and if you don't, it's then it's allowed by right. But we do address secondary dwelling units in our ordinance code in various locations.
It's Title 17, you said?
So Title 17, it's like the Chronicles of Narnia. It's like the ever famous book I'll keep referring to. It's basically where the county of Tuolumne is governed by a big chapter book. Each chapter is called a title. Title 14 deals with cultural resources. Title 16 deals with subdivisions, and Title 17 deals with zoning and land uses. And so Mike Laird had that on speed dial in his head. Nowhere near as good as that, but that's where a lot of my daily answers lie.
So if it's got to be addressed in the county ordinance, is there a specific date it has to be addressed by, or does it come when the new general plan comes in?
It doesn't. It's not really related to the general plan.
Oh, okay.
The general plan will
Kick it to the curb?
No, not by any means. No, the general plan addresses the value, and that's sort of what I was explaining in an earlier statement about sort of how we break these answers down, and that the general plan addresses the goals of why we need second units, why do we need trails, why do we need bike paths. It might per se give us a program or a goal for a program of how we create that, and then the way we really go about it is through our ordinance code.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about how you separate these things out, because it seems to me that the general plan is this broader concept. When people here are asking about, well, I own 20 acres and I want to put another house on it, that isn't necessarily part of the general plan, is it? That's more the regulations that the county adopts, or is that part of the general plan?
I'm going to skip ahead and answer your question. So don't look, everyone, close your eyes. Okay, so here's a picture, okay? Here's a picture of Tuolumne County. And this is what it looks like when you're flying overhead. And take this picture and put it over any place in America. We fly over, and this is what it looks like, okay? And then we're going to drop a general plan onto it, and that's what it looks like, okay? And so we've got some colors. We've got some green here. This is our agriculture. Our different color browns tend to be our more rural parcels, 2 acres, 3 acres, 5 acres in size. Our blue is our commercial. Yellow is our single-family residential, so smaller lot sizes like your typical subdivision would be. And so this is how we look at it. We look at it from the broad view. And people want to go, well, what can I do on my property? And that's what they can do. Okay, so this is the zoning code. So this is the general plan, and this is the zoning code. Okay, and that's a big distinction that that needs to be made, and is hopefully something that we can assist the community in understanding. Oftentimes, I would zoom in if I could, but I don't think I could get back to where I was, so I'll just point out to a parcel. I'm just going to pick one. I have no idea what this is. This piece of parcel that's blue here, okay? So let's say that's commercial, and someone comes in and they say they're going to build a shopping center there. And the county goes, oh, okay, you need a use permit, or you need a site development permit, or you need some other entitlement, because this is what kind of we care about right now. Because guess what? We already told you were blue. And so as long as you build something that's blue, that's okay with us. And guess what? It's okay with you, because you elected your board of supervisors. The board of supervisors said it could be blue. So we go, we don't want them to build blue there. That's a horrible choice for blue. We go, oh, I'm so sorry. If only you had been at the 1996 general plan amendment hearing, because you could have said, this should be red. And they might have been like, you know what? That should be red, okay? But today it's blue. And so to go from blue to red, we can do that. That can happen. But that's not as easy as building blue, okay? So now, while we're all here, now is when we need to look at, should this be blue? Is this a good idea for it to be blue? Because if we all bless it and say it's blue, they're going to come in and build blue. And it's going to be a lot harder and more difficult for this person who's green to say this shouldn't be blue. And so that's why the general plan is so important. Because it doesn't say what the setback should be, or what the sign should look like, or if the light should be pointed up or down. All we're talking about is should it be blue? And that's why the general plan update is so important. So if you live next door to something that's going to be blue, you need to speak now. Not to say that in the future, coming out and saying, you know what, we should have done red, and that wouldn't happen. It's just a lot easier to have that conversation now. Because once the general plan is updated, you may or may not know, but California legislature, California statute, only allows us to update the general plan 4 times a year. Because it's so important not to change your general plan. This is our Constitution, and it's so important to get it right, because we're only allowed to change it 4 times a year in the future. And so if we screw this up, and well, this should be red, and this should be green, and this should be purple, we're in big trouble, because we're going to have problems down the road. Yes, you have a question?
Did you say 4 times a year?
Correct, 4 times a year.
That seems like a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a lot.
To each his own opinion.
When was the last time it was revised here?
Okay, so the last countywide general plan amendment occurred in 1996. Because the legislature gives the county 4 shots a year to update it, there's an opportunity for landowners, or let's even could say the county, if the county had a project that they wanted to bring forward, there's 4 opportunities a year for there to be a public hearing for the Board of Supervisors to act on a general plan amendment. And so that's when you get your, it's blue, but it should be red, or it's brown, but it should be yellow, okay? And so that's sort of when that sort of more specific parcel by parcel planning happens. We're gonna try to get it right the first time, but there's a process for a landowner to go through if they think that we picked the wrong color. And that's there. Barbara?
I think you're making a really good point, because a lot of folks just throw up their hands and say, well, we can't do anything, it's already zoned commercial. And what you're saying is, the general plans, that is, we can revisit these things and re-question whether that's a good idea.
Absolutely.
Heavy traffic, safety, maybe it's not a good idea. Way back when it was rural, we zoned that little area commercial. Like Oakdale is a great point. The four corners right there at Oakdale that used to have all those gas stations, they downzoned those and got rid of the gas stations. So I think that's important for people to say, it's not a done deal.
It's not a done deal. You get there's a process for landowners or a government entity to go through to change the general plan on their project site. And at some point that might be perfectly appropriate to do so. I would never say that changing a general plan is an all-out terrible idea down the road. We might get it wrong. There might be a better idea that comes forward. Someone might receive funding for something that's too good of an opportunity to pass up. So that's why we have these opportunities to change it. But as the citizens, I'll get to your question, as the citizens of a county, it's important to know that if a project comes before a decision-making body, and the decision-making body has already said it's blue, and they're gonna build blue, it's a lot harder to, let me put it this way, legally say you can't build blue, okay? The burden is not necessarily on that landowner or the planning department to prove it shouldn't be blue, because we've already, and we'll get to it in a little bit, adopted an environmental document that says it should be blue. And so it's a bigger burden down the road for you to do that, and for someone to say, you know what, it shouldn't be commercial, this shouldn't be high density residential, it should be something else. So, did you have a question?
I did. I'm just curious about this that you can amend the general plan 4 times a year. Typically, does that happen 4 times a year?
So
And then my second part is, are people strategic about that? I mean, if it's a calendar year, like, it's like January, I better go.
So the county in our policy, not in law or anything like that, it's our policy that we hold general plan amendments, because that's what someone's asking us to do, is they're saying, we already adopted this as our general plan, but we're gonna ask the government body to amend it. So it's called a general plan amendment, and we hold hearings on those in the spring and in the fall. And we build in lead time for a submittal for an application to ensure that we have enough time to review it and to complete any sort of environmental process. So that's how many times we officially do it here in Tuolumne County. There's 2 additional opportunities as needed. You know, sometimes there could be some, I don't know, emergency project or an emergency general plan amendment that needs to be done. So we try as policy to funnel those hearings into those 2 opportunities. To be strategic about it, I think it's all in the eye of the landowner. You know, usually it's an economic situation for them, how long they have to hold onto a property before a general plan amendment is either approved or denied before they can move forward with the project. So that's what I say. Yeah.
What is the initial process to start this? What do? You have to get your neighbors together and say, well, let's go down there. And then what do you do after that? Your neighbors all say, hey, we want to change something over here. So what do? We got to wait until the Board of Supervisors calls one of these general plan amendment processes?
So John, did you want to jump in?
I think there may be some misunderstanding here, and you've said it correctly, but it may not have been translated. General plan amendments aren't for somebody in the neighborhood to come in and say, we don't like what our neighboring project to the property is entitled to now, we want to change their zoning or something. Legally, there's a possibility, if the community convinced the Board of Supervisors to do that, that could happen. But the reality is, general plan amendments are when Jim Jones decides that he doesn't like what the general plan restricts his property to now. So he comes in to allow more development or a different kind of development on his property. That's what the general plan amendments are about. And although it is true, and you use the example of making it blue, that once in 20 years, you have an opportunity to get your comments in at the general plan hearings. But having been very involved in the last one, Board of Supervisors, thank you for your comments. Your comments are important to us. They take in all the comments, and they do what they feel they've been led to do by the planners, by the building industry, by many different sources, but they approve something. That was your one chance to change it for the general plan until a general plan amendment comes up. So it's just a little different than what some might think.
Well, I won't comment on all of that. Given that I was promised this was a bipartisan, nonpartisan group, I'll speak to the process. Every 10, 15, 20, 30 years, we make a map, all right?
Yeah.
And we say, this is what we think we should do. We take input in from the public, and a map is approved. There's a lot more to a general plan than a map, which I want to make sure I get to. Between when we make a big map like this and the next time we make a big map like this, there's an opportunity for an individual landowner to come in and request a change. And that change goes through a planning process that involves an application to our department. It involves an environmental review, and it involves a public hearing. So that's a process that we repeat over and over again. Lots of information on that is on our website about how that process works. We have handouts for anybody who wants to know what that general plan amendment process looks like. But by and large, this is kind of our chance to reevaluate. And it's not just, I'll grab your question. It's not just looking at should this be blue. It's really looking at, is there something that's going to create a community here that would induce, that we need to provide services for? So it's not always a negative thing. I know that when we change to the general plan can be very contentious, but it's not always a negative thing. It's important to know that, okay, if, where am I? Okay, so I'm off the map, but this is kind of getting down to Lake Don Pedro down here, okay? So we go, okay, we have UC Merced coming in Merced, and LaGrange is going to be a natural bedroom community to possibly to this town. And we have data to show that there's going to be an economic connection between LaGrange and Merced, a transportation connection, and so we need to plan for that, okay? So it's not always, I want to build a Walmart in Lake Don Pedro. It could be, and that's why understanding the process is, that's why I'm so grateful to be asked here, because understanding the process and the underlying themes of how this plan works, I think gives you a leg up when you're looking at future development in your town. And I promote education. I tell my planners to have the public put some skin in the game, that we want to give you the tools to find the answer, not necessarily always the answer. It makes a engaged public, makes a more civic-minded community, and that's one of my goals. Do you have a question? Yeah.
I have a question about circulation, specifically about the classification of roadways, local, minor, rural collector, major rural collector, and how those are determined, and how the general public can influence the determination of those roads, given that the actual widths and structure of those roads don't necessarily meet the formal guidelines that have been provided for the classifications that are being used for funding.
It's a great question. I will do my best to answer it, but I am nowhere near the expert in this area. The question was about classification of roadways and things called major arterials and minor collectors and local roads, and how does that designation happen and how does that relate back to actually how they're designed. So there's a couple things that come into play, but the biggest one I would say is traffic volume, average daily trips, number of residents or number of parcels served, ability to obtain right-of-way, which is basically the invisible easement that a road is built within, and then maybe let's throw in some topographical challenges, okay? And so those are sort of the things that go into the designation of a road. We're sort of reaching the end of my experience with this topic, but obviously we have serves Apple Valley, Lionsfall Mountain, which is not a through road, but has a designation that basically gives it the clout of a through road, and has to do with trips and the number of houses that are served. So transportation planning is a very complicated topic that I did not emphasize in, and but those designations are put in the general plan, and when I need to see when I'm doing an environmental evaluation for a project, I will use the lists in the general plan to help guide me with what level of roadway I have.
So just a quick follow-up, so will the general public be in a position to influence the classification of these roads going forward in the update to the general plan? There are clearly some roads that are misclassified to the detriment of the community.
So I would definitely, either let's converse afterwards and so we can exchange information so that I can get you in touch with the right person, because I am not the right person for that. Yeah.
I got one quick question. Public utilities and facilities, would that include internet access?
In the circulation element, it might include access for those types of things, but typically public utilities are going to come in our general plan, come in element, I think it's called public facilities, and are identified separately, and it's in cell towers, are kind of wireless towers roll into that chapter. But it also telecommunications cross a lot of elements of the general plan: economic development, land use, circulation, safety, etc. And I did forget your question. I don't want to, so go ahead.
Way back.
I know. Let's jump in the Wayback Machine.
You said a property owner can request a change in the general plan just for their own property, or can they request for the neighborhood area?
That's a great question. So when someone submits an application to the county, we require a landowner's signature. So you would not be able to submit on behalf of your neighbors. You could joint submit if you all wanted to become something together. But maybe what you're alluding to is more of a community plan or a specific plan. If some of our communities in the county, typically our older communities, but that shouldn't be a limiting factor, do kind of come together, and the county has a more specific set of land use goals, policies, and implementation programs that apply to certain areas of the county. So if you and I were neighbors and we were both yellow and you wanted to become blue, you couldn't turn an application for me in to make me be blue too. You could apply for yourself, and at that point, and yourself only. So we were here. This is fun. Just a little bit briefly on some of the things that are different elements. Talk about roads and transportation routes, bus routes. In our county, we have goals, policies, and programs about aviation. We have 2 airports that are relative railways. And like I talked about earlier, is they need to be consistent across elements. I sort of gave an example of housing and roads and things like that. Land use, another one of our more prominent elements. This is where our land use map typically resides, which gets a lot of press and a lot of focus. But like I said, that's just one part of our general plan. The land use element talks about where and how we should be doing housing and commercial development, industrial development, where should open space be, where do we want parks and recreation, other public facilities, where do we want kind of the things that maybe nobody wants to live next to, where do we want our landfills, and other things like that. An open space element is, or topic is required by the legislature, and this talks about preserving open space for natural resources, managing those natural resources as it may be, as well as discussions about outdoor safety, public health, things like that.
Yeah, so another question regarding open space. How does the county go about, in the general plan, classifying, or in this case, reclassifying what constitutes a part of the watershed? There's areas in the county that are clearly part of the Tuolumne watershed that are not specifically included for planning purposes, and that has a very large impact on open space preservation and land use.
So
and also circulation.
Yeah, so I would have to admit that, and those who in the room who have read it more than I, please chime in, because this is a collective group. I don't believe the word watershed planning is in the general plan. That is not, while it may be mapped, while it may be mapped and identified in sort of kind of our baseline setting, in terms of goals, programs, policies, implementation programs that are based on watershed boundaries, it's not something that is in the general plan. Something to that topic could come up in the EIR, in the Environmental Impact Report, when you're looking at the environmental checklist or the environmental topics that the document needs to address. So there could be a connection between general plan, development impacts, and watershed planning in that capacity. But in terms of planning, using the word watershed planning, which exists, I don't believe that's something that's in our general plan for now.
Is that something that can be promoted? To
Absolutely.
So that it becomes a first and foremost issue, particularly as the degradation of water becomes a more serious issue here.
What I can do is when we kind of get to the end and we kind of get into Q&A, and I'll give you sort of an update of where we are and what at least our goals are at this point for moving the general plan forward, and we can kind of talk about that then. Okay. Noise, another element that's required by the state, and it kind of looks at existing land uses that may create nuisance noises, as well as puts thresholds in the general plan regarding new development. What it doesn't do is set thresholds for existing development. Tuolumne County doesn't have a noise ordinance, so if your neighbors are loud and keeping you up, there's no rule or regulation at the county level to say you're above or below the line. But what the general plan does have is some guidelines based on research in other jurisdictions and things of that nature, as well as some of our own studies, to set parameters for noise impacts on new development. Not our thickest element, but certainly important. 1 second. Yeah, go ahead.
Along the same line, what about planning for light? In other words, planning for the dark sky.
Dark sky. That is in the general plan. And that is in the general plan and is a typical condition that's added on through our permit process regarding the direction of lighting. Just looked at a permit we were working on this week, and we typically monitor that through the submittal of a plan that shows the lumens at the property boundaries so that we can look at spillover lighting onto adjacent property. But does it regulate what wattage bulb your neighbor puts in their garage? their garage outdoor fixture, no, it doesn't address that. It's broader in nature. Yeah, questions? Go. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I wanted to talk a little bit about noise. I didn't realize that the county didn't have any noise ordinances except just for temporary construction. Neighbor A had a very loud rapid fire weapon. Neighbor B had dirt bikes. And I was going nuts. And that's when I found out there were no ordinances. So my question is, would state ordinances that the state has adopted broad brush, do those ordinances just sort of stop as soon as you enter Tuolumne County?
That sounds like a loaded question. So I'll speak, I don't know specifically, I don't know exactly what ordinance you're talking about, but typically, when the state hands us down an unfunded mandate, as it sounds like that would be, we can always enforce with more strength, but not with less. That's sort of a broad rule of thumb, so I can talk more about that with you. Yeah, did you have a question?
Yeah, it ties to what she was just saying as far as noise. There are certain roads, for instance, that being misclassified and then their speed limits not being managed well. So if you've got a cement truck doing 55 in a 35 residence area jake braking and no ordinance to prevent that, that's a problem. And is this the type of things that the community can address during this general plan update process? Because this has got to change.
So there are some maps in the existing noise ordinance of the general plan that put some noise contours on some of our more, well, I think it might only be Highway 108, I couldn't say for sure, but put some noise contours on exposure to noise levels for new development along those pathways. And so yes and no. That there are some regulations that deal with transportation noise, but you know, for communities that were there before we had the noise element of the general plan, it presents a challenge. Yeah. John?
Yeah, just to emphasize again, there's some good things that the county has, and their new development noise ordinance, which is one that's in existence now, they do have for new development very clear parameters at the boundary line of properties, so that if someone is creating a new winery with events that are going to go till 1 in the morning, the noise can only be at a certain level of decibels. When it hits the edge of that boundary or is affecting people on their side of the boundary, the challenge obviously is who is measuring, who enforces it, and even though it's approved with those, because of the general plan and ordinances that are part of the noise element, it still is something that takes citizen advocacy sometimes to get enforcement. But that one, similar to what you were talking about, I think for the other one, but there's very clear requirements, and it's something that's easily understood. So it's very positive that the county has good science and has utilized it over the years when approving new development. But if someone doesn't like cement trucks grinding, down the road or whatever at very loud noise, I doubt that anything in this general plan will be affecting that.
But when I was county supervisor, we ordered some road studies and worked through public works to answer that question. But you could disabuse me if things have changed since then. But people would come to me and when it was a serious community issue, and we did some changes. Jake brakes, Twain Hart, that stuff was there before, but no one changed. So we have different areas in the county that don't allow the Jake brake, and they post them as such. And that came through road studies, and then also traffic studies regarding people are going way too fast, and we had a traffic study, and in fact, there's rules.
Right.
it raised the speed limit,
right.
so be
That's right.
afraid of what you
Don't
ask
ask for
for.
a,
Because
do not
that's
ask for a speed study, you'll be disappointed.
Yeah, be careful what you ask for, you
That's
need to be
right.
aware that then we were required to raise the speed limit, and that happened on Tuolumne Highway in last year, so. Just thought I'd mention.
No, it's-
Oh, we've seen it go up, down, I'm just gonna swear, I thought it was last month that it said this.
Yeah, you can.
So you can go through Public Works to work on some of those issues.
Never seen it.
Another element in the general plan that's on the top of all of our minds, especially with recent wildfire, both in the state and locally, is the safety element. You know, a lot of things, seismic and geologic, won't change from, shocking, won't change from general plan update to general plan update, but certainly flood hazards are something we always want to take a look at, as well as wildfire hazards. And there's a huge interface here between CAL FIRE and what we're required to do from our state partners. So there's a big linkage right there. I was reading an article about Santa Rosa and about the building department and the questions that they're asking themselves about rebuilding down there. And
Yeah.
it's a very, very challenging situation. Do they rebuild as, you know, how they were, or do they don't? I don't have any answer to that, so. Housing, we kind of talked a little bit about that. Lots of data, lots of tables, more numbers than words. But out of that, a community can puts forth policies and programs to encourage types of housing that they want in their community. And like I said, this is updated every 5 years, and lucky for me, we're due for an update in 2018. Conservation, a lot of times this is partnered with open space. But it addresses conservation, development, and use of water, forest, soils. This is just a list. Mineral deposits. Obviously, that pops up in our county. That's pretty unique in our area compared to potentially other counties I've worked in. Rivers, waterways. The current general plan lumps a lot of stuff in here into this element. Other topics that are coming out in the new general plan, climate change. Your 1996 general plan does not address climate change. And the 2018, Carol asked me if I was going to push the date at the beginning of the meeting, and I'm not. 2018, your 2018 general plan will address climate change. Not necessarily our emissions. We've documented that in 2012. We did the Tuolumne County Blueprint Study, which did look at climate emissions. But the state is asking us to look at climate change, climate vulnerability, and climate adaptation. What do we do once the climate changes? So that is something that we're looking at in our general plan. Another topic that's new for the next general plan is environmental justice. This is looking at to reduce exposure from pollution, air quality, access to public facilities, housing. The key word here is in identified disadvantaged communities. The 2017 OPR, I'm using some lingo for you, OPR guidelines are very clear in what type of community qualifies as a disadvantaged community. There's a state agency involved in one of the definitions, and there's some economic and census data in another definition, and we do not have in Tuolumne County any communities that are identified per these agencies and this criteria as disadvantaged communities. Therefore, don't expect to see a lot on this. And it's not that the county is not, that these aren't important topics. It's, we've got a lot going on, and this is not something that is required for us to implement. We will state, we will obviously give information as to why none of our counties qualify. It would be nice if they did. It would be nice if we were able to qualify. I think it would help us down the road for grants and other types of funding services, but typically in the past, especially in our housing program, when we have applied for grants, and they use a disadvantaged community criteria, we do not qualify for those grants. Yeah.
Despite, I'm sorry, no, please.
What's OPR?
Oh, you weren't listening? He wasn't listening.
I thought I was listening.
No. It was a
Open
test.
summer.
It stands for Office of Planning and Research, and it's
Okay.
the state agency that is the general plan, the agency that helps us with our general plan. Yeah,
All
for sure.
right, I got my spanking.
Yeah,
Okay.
go ahead.
So on the issue of environmental justice, realizing that it's not, Tuolumne County doesn't meet the criteria, there are still certain areas, certain pockets within the county that are subject to excessive noise, water, air, and land pollution, just by the fact of the amount of traffic that's passing by at high rate of speed unregulated. So that is an environmental justice issue in the broadest sense, that certain areas of the county are suffering the impacts or are burdened by the impacts of certain roadway uses that are not specifically
Right.
classified by what you're saying there. How is that going to be addressed?
Right, so I would never discount what you're telling me, but this is what I would say is that we need data to support that, and that's how, we make policies, is what's an uncomfortable noise level for you might be a comfortable noise level for Carol, and while that's an important testimony, it's not necessarily the whole enchilada. And so I would encourage anyone in our community who has local issues that need to be addressed, that they bring them to, we can't help you if you don't tell us. And so and some of you may feel like I've been raising my hand for 30 years and nobody's listening. But all I can tell you is that, like I said, I have no notes. We're here from the heart, and we truly are here for your community. And so if you don't tell me, I can't help you. And that's the starting point for it. So, yeah.
What is the legal status of the general plan in regards to state enforcement and oversight? And also redress of grievances?
So, and this again, collaborative effort, correct me if I'm wrong. So the state doesn't police a local government to ensure that they are making decisions that are in compliance with their general plan. That's your job. So the state agency, while it exists, it provides guidance and it certifies us. It says you have met your requirement to include these mandatory elements in your general plan, and that's about it.
So you said it's up to us, but it's up to us to do what?
So
What is the mechanism of redress?
sure. Carol. Carol is very familiar with the mechanism of redress. So, we would adopt a general plan, and it's full of goals, policies, and programs. And then and that sounds really nice. And then we have the day-to-day applications that come through our department that county government is charged with in evaluating. Every time we take a project in the recent history to the Board of Supervisors, we start our planning presentations with, these are the values of Tuolumne County, this is the mission of Tuolumne County, and these are the things that we evaluate a project against. And so that's our job, is to determine professionally whether or not we've done that. We put it up to our elected officials to make wise choices that they are implementing the general plan in the correct manner, and it is the public's right to hold them accountable for that.
Okay, so it's the public's right to hold them accountable for that. How?
Lawsuit.
It's lawsuit. Okay, thank you. And vote them out of office, well, now there's an idea.
Well, I won't speak to that because you promised me this was bipartisan, nonpartisan. But I will say that the planners that work for the county are professionals. We've received extensive training in this field, and speaking for myself and my colleagues, is we're applying our best practices and our best knowledge to make a recommendation on a project that we feel is either consistent or not consistent. And since I've been there, I have no problems in my gut. I feel like we're doing the best we can. And
Then
we've.
you have to turn that over to the Board of Supervisors, at which point, then you're done with it and they get to do what they choose to do. Thank you, are elected to do it. And I guess that's the place along the road that I'm thinking about.
Well, I think, to speak generally to your point, I think forums where we can come together with an open mind and professionals can have an opportunity to teach you what we know, is a very important part of the process. And so rather starting at the end, I truly appreciate an opportunity to come and start at the beginning. And I think that an informed, like I said, an informed community provides, if there were this many, let me put it to you this way.
Let me clarify that I am not criticizing you in any way.
None taken. Well, let me put it to you this way. If this many folks ever came to one of our standard, maybe, non-major commercial center public hearings for a project, it would be fabulous. And typically the only person in the room I have holding me accountable to anything is Carol. And so to be able to have community involvement at even just the level that has been shown tonight would be magnificent. The general plan is certainly a critical part to get involved in, but there's lots of other decisions that government makes every day that are of equal value. And I can't stress that enough. You mentioned roadway classifications and noise. These are very specific personal experiences that you're going through that can lead to change. And so to getting involved in the general plan and helping us figure out what should be blue and what should be red is very important. But engagement in other parts of the planning process, and while it's perfectly well within your right to just say, I don't like this project, I don't like this. As a profession, that doesn't get me very far. It's hard for me to help you if you don't help me. And so it's a two-way street. That's why I said it's a collaboration, because we want to be able to give light to the concerns of the people who live in the community where a project's proposed. But just to say, I don't like it, it's going to be noisy, while it's very valid and perfectly legal for you to do, give us some more so that we can help you. Yeah, do you have a question, Mercedes?
So we just have a few minutes.
Yes, okay.
Left, and as I have a lot of questions, and I think that not all the questions can be answered in this moment. So I am wondering if a logic follow-up could be like go over the procedures that we as a public, interested public, how can we learn all those things that we need to do? We know how frustrating it is to go to the meetings and not be heard, and so something is not working. So I guess that for us, we need to learn exactly what is the most efficient way to do it. And so
I agree, and I have more slides, but they do go on to other topics, and I can save them, but I do want to show you, because I told you I was into graphics. Okay, so I got this for you guys, okay? Which sort of speaks to a little bit about what you're saying, Mercedes, is that you're here's the entrance, you got yourself halfway, and this is I don't feel that this is how our planning department operates, but I can understand and sympathize that this might be a perception of the public. And so this is a map with arrows everywhere trying to send you upside down and around. The one thing we didn't get to tonight was CEQA, and I love this picture. These are these two 80-year-old marathon runners, and I changed their race bibs. And so as you can see that this gentleman, he's the general plan, and he's holding the hand of the EIR. And we didn't get a chance to talk about CEQA tonight, but But for a future topic, we can dive into this, and that the EIR, which is an environmental impact report, holds hands with our general plan to get it across the finish line. I also made this one for you. I love this. I'm a dork. And so this is my big rig. And it's the Sequoia Trucking Company, and it's the EIR company, and it's going to deliver the Tuolumne County General Plan, because the general plan needs a ride, and we put it on the Sequoia truck, and that's how we get to the finish line. And then this is the end here. But so what does it all mean? It means peace, love, and happiness. That's what we're all going for here. And sort of a little bit what we alluded to, things on the county website, although I heard anecdotally that it's not working today. So my apologies, public meetings and ask questions. So I know that we are running out of time, and you had a few things at the end. My contact information is on our county website, but I'm Quincy Yaley. You can find me at Tuolumne County at the 4th floor. I would love it if you would make an appointment to come and see me. I'm happy to talk with any of you. 533-5633. Did you have a question? Yeah.
Can you tell us where you are, where the planning department is relative to the general plan and the revised draft environmental impact report, when the revised one is going to be released?
We're hoping to have the revised general plan update out for public comment next summer. And that will, again, be holding the hand of the environmental impact report that will go along with it. We just finished a request for proposals for an EIR consultant, and we have those and should shortly be choosing an environmental consultant to work on the environmental impact report that was completed. Parts of it will take and move forward, and parts of it will be reworked. The larger general plan update itself, the underlying premises that have gone into it in terms of locations of growth, population trends and things like that. I don't expect those to change. What I do expect you to see a document that has a increased readability, that has less, hopefully none, internal inconsistencies, and is something that we can use. A lot of work, and I would say community work, has gone into where the general plan update is today. We just met with some farm folks, and they said, it's fine, don't change a thing. We worked on it, and it's great. So we're sort of we're doing a lot of outreach right now. You all are part of my tour, and we just want to kind of catch up, and where did it go, where has it been, and where does it need to go from where it is. So yeah.
Yeah, this is going to be a brief question, I think. I hope for a good answer. It seems that when the planning department comes up with something and then opens it up for public comment, it's already a done deal. I mean, we get to talk about it and complain about it, but it doesn't mean anything because that's already there. So what would be the way to get in on an earlier stage to try to influence what we see before the public comments and before it's all done?
Right, great question. So the draft general plan is on the street, and the EIR is on the street, and it's been there since December of 2015. It's on our county website. And so if there's specific policies, concerns, colors that you don't like, now is the time to let us know. I tell groups that
And do that by
email, letter, carrier, pigeon, your choice. However you want to get me the information. I'm your person, okay? But what you said when you said it when you release it and it's a done deal, I hope that when we release the 2018 general plan update, and that there's no surprises, that you all have been included along the way, and that we've had an open dialogue, and that when the general plan update goes out, it may not be exactly what you want, but you'll go, yeah, that's kind of what they said they were going to do, and I can live with that. So I kind of hope that, I love the eye rolls tonight. This is great, you guys, man. I should bring my kids in here. You guys could give them a lesson. This is great.
We would like to invite you again.
Thank you.
There are a lot of questions,
Yes.
and I think that Yeah, it would be really good, so we would like to make another session.
Yes,
Thank you.
absolutely.
Thank you so